Hello, everyone. If you're here today listening and watching this recording, you're here to learn about how to be a more prepared caregiver for yourself and the veteran that you care for. During today's webinar, I'm going to go over some key points that you should know when making a customized caregiver of a veteran plan, what you should need to know to be in your kit, how to build a kit successfully as a caregiver, and then also what it means to manage and mitigate risk when it comes to caring for your veteran during one of the most chaotic and stressful times you and your community can experience. But before we get started today, I want to make you all aware that this webinar is powered by the Wounded Warrior Project. By working together, the Wounded Warrior Project and the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers provides a broader, more complete range of programs and services that greatly improve the lives of warriors, their families, and their caregivers. Wounded Warriors programs, advocacy, and collaboration with other veteran organizations like the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers help foster the most successful, well-adjusted generation of wounded service members in our nation's history. The Wounded Warrior Project offers life-changing services in mental and brain health, career counseling, benefits, physical health and wellness, advocacy, and long-term rehabilitative care. Warriors and their family support members never have to pay a penny for any of these programs. If you're interested in learning more, you can look at their website or you can scan the QR code that's at the bottom right hand of your screen. Now, before we jump into today's webinar, I'd like us all to take a few seconds and look at this QR code and fill out this survey. This survey is to help us create programs that are for caregivers by caregivers. This survey also lets us know how you're doing in the world of disaster preparedness, how you feel before and after today's webinar. So scan the code, fill out the questions, let us know what you think, and we'll do this again at the end of the webinar. But let's get started in talking about disaster preparedness and what this webinar is going to look like. So when we talk about disaster preparedness, I'm going to move around some screens. I'm going to share some screens for you to kind of let you see what it means when we talk about plans, when we talk about building kits and having checklists, when we talk about managing those really hard to get at topics such as PTSD, anxiety, stress, all related to managing and mitigating risk while we're experiencing a disaster or emergency in our home. Okay, so before I do any of that, I want to talk about some elephants in the room. Okay, so when we talk about disaster preparedness, and especially when we're a caregiver, that's an overwhelming thought, right? That's an overwhelming topic. That just looks to us as caregivers as on top of everything I already do every day as a caregiver of a veteran. Now I have to prepare something for something that may or may not happen at an unknown time, and I have no control of any of it. And that can sound really scary. But I'm hoping today I can give you some really tangible action steps to help you move forward in disaster preparedness and let you see that it doesn't have to be complicated and that we can take simple, small, meaningful steps to increase our preparedness and help us thrive before, during, and after a disaster. Okay? So, with that being said, I want you all to know that we have made a customized disaster preparedness toolkit for caregivers of veterans just like you in partnership with the Veteran Affairs Office. So if you'll go to the rosalindcarter.org, you can find your free customizable toolkit that you can download and you can start working on after today's webinar. I'm going to be using some snippets from that toolkit to kind of show you what it looks like, give you some ideas of how you can make your own toolkit if this isn't something you want, and really make it something that's for you that you can utilize in any time of a disaster. So let's talk about disasters and preparedness. And so the first thing I'm going to tell you when we look at preparedness is that preparedness is not a static process, okay? Your planning, your kits, the checklist, all the things that you do to prepare, we should be looking at it regularly because things change, we change. And so when all of our needs change and we change in our relationships and how our family works, we need to keep track of those. And one of the most important places to keep track of those changes is in our disaster preparedness plan. And also know that when we do that, making a plan and building our kit also doesn't mean that we're going to get it right the first time around. We have to remember that throughout this, that this is a process and that you're going to find what works and what doesn't work. And emergency disaster planning is an ongoing process. We have to constantly look at what we've done, what worked, what didn't work, what's working now, and how we can adjust those plans to meet our needs. Okay? So, the first thing that we're going to talk about in today's webinar is something that every emergency professional, anybody that's in the world of disaster preparedness, that works in emergencies, from your first responders all the way to your emergency management director, they're going to tell you this. The first thing that you need to do when you're looking at disaster preparedness is you got to have a plan. Okay? Having an emergency plan is going to help you do several things. One, it's going to let you have all of your vital information in one place so that when you need to activate it, you can do it on the spot. And there's no fumbling around for all different papers and contacts and things like that. You'll have it all. And so it's going to help you ultimately be really organized in a really unorganized time. Okay? And having a disaster preparedness plan, especially one that's tailored to you as a veteran caregiver, also means that you know how to help your veteran and that you have a plan to go by. That also means everyone on your care team also knows what works and being helpful for your veteran during a very difficult time, and there's no mystery. So we're not trying new things all of a sudden during this very chaotic time. You know it works, you have it in this plan, so that way if your care team would need to step in, they also know what works to help keep your veterans safe, help decrease their stress and anxiety, help eliminate maybe some of those symptoms that we experience regarding PTSD in a very chaotic environment. I also, when I think of having an emergency plan, regardless of everything else and all the good stuff that comes with it, right? We're going to be really prepared. We're going to be really organized. When I think of having a plan, I think about it being hopeful, that regardless of everything else, I have hope and that I have a structure, I have a direction, I have a map to go by, which I think is really important because when we think of disasters, when we think of emergencies that happen, we also know that they're very uncertain, they're very chaotic, but I have a plan and I know what I'm doing. So that makes me feel better. That makes me feel hopeful about the outcome of what's going to happen. All right. So high level, what a plan can do for you and the importance of it. But when we look at a plan, one of the best things to do as a caregiver and looking at preparedness is to really know what types of disasters you're going to experience and where you're going to get your information before, during, and after a disaster. It is important to recognize that there are lots of options to get your information, lots of news going around, lots of stories being told when a disaster hits. But I'm going to tell you, in terms of a disaster in your community, you want to make sure that you're getting your information from a local source, okay? Your local news outlets are really going to be in direct contact with those first responders and those emergency management personnel, and will have the latest and best information for you as someone that is being affected by a disaster, okay? Now, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to look at a template plan that we have built in our disaster preparedness toolkit. Again, you can download that plan for free at the rosalindcarter.org website. So let's share my screen. And if we look here at our screen, we see a template plan. And the first thing this plan is going to ask you is what disasters impact my area the most and where I'm going to get my information and alerts, warnings, any of that good stuff. Okay. Also in that plan, we're going to make sure we're listing everybody in the household. We're going to list all of their contact information, including email and social. So I find that when we're naming all the individuals in our household and we include their social media accounts, I know that can sound a little strange. It's important to know that if we were to lose our phone, if we were not to have access to our phone, it were to get broken, lost in a chaotic environment as we're evacuating, that we have some type of connection. Okay. So if we remember, sometimes during hurricanes and severe weather, some people mark themselves safe on their social media accounts. That's a way to let your care team know, family that doesn't live in the area, that, hey, you might not have access to fully talk to them and have these long conversations, but they can look on your account and see that you are safe, you are somewhere where people know where you are and can take care of you. This is also really good if you were to get separated from someone in your household and you were to need, the latest pictures that they've had. This is a really good place to get those pictures if you didn't take them with you when you evacuated and you want to show this is what they look like. This is kind of some of their stats. These are who they're friends with. This can help you find a person if you're lost during a disaster, but then ultimately have another connection point that first responders, emergency personnel can have, and also you as a family member. Okay. We don't want to exclude things that might help us reconnect. Okay. It can be a very chaotic time and we want to make sure we have all the things that we need. Okay. So when we're looking at how you are preparing and who's in your house and we're making this plan, we need to also identify any individuals with special needs in the home. Okay. Not just our veteran who might have a traumatic brain injury or might have some physical limitation due to their wounds of war, but also anybody else, including children with special needs, and even you that have special needs as a caregiver, whether that be somebody needs to know that I have a severe allergy to peanuts, or I can't have any dairy, or I have high blood pressure as a caregiver, I am diabetic. Those are all really good things to know when you have in this plan to include about yourself and everybody in your household, because it helps others care for you. You have a plan, you can enact it, and you have all your information right there. Okay. So here is our template plan. You can take a look at it. Again, you can download this toolkit to kind of see where you can customize it, what you need, what you don't need. And we're going to come back to some spots in this toolkit a little bit later, but we're going to keep talking about everything that needs to be in your plan. Okay. So as you're looking at your plan, you want to include some things that might seem very obvious. Okay. But we need to know where they are, right? So you want to know where your home safe spots are. If I were to have to shelter in place, what does that mean for me? Where am I going to go? Where am I going to round up all of my kids and my animals and my veteran? And where are we going to hunker down at in my house? We also in our plan need to know what to do if you're going to have to evacuate. You need an evacuation plan. Even if you never have had to evacuate before in the entirety of experiencing natural disasters and emergencies, you need to have an evacuation plan. We would rather over prepare than under prepare. Okay. So we want an evacuation plan. We also want to include some other alternative meeting spots. Okay. We can't guarantee that the meeting spot we have in our head, if we were to evacuate and we're all rendezvousing at this particular location, if we can't get to it, what are our secondary locations? We need to know what the plan is and how we're going to get there. Okay. We also need to make sure that in this, we're kind of taking some steps to prepare our veteran and our care team. That means we're having conversations. Hey, we're learning about disaster preparedness and what that means. And we'd really like to talk about that with you, my veteran, you, my care team. We want you to know what our plan is to stay safe during an emergency, a natural disaster, and that you know we are being prepared and that I have a plan. Remember, planning means nothing if you're not going to communicate about it and you're not going to implement it. Okay. So we want to make a plan, but we also want to take active steps to implement it. We want to be sure that everybody knows what our plan is and how we can get there. Okay. We also want to know what that means in our plan. Have a little section, maybe a couple lines. Again, it can be keywords, it can be sentences, whatever feels best to you. But we want to know, and my suggestion to you to customize your plan is really how you, as a caregiver of a veteran, really look at preparing your veteran. Okay, so what steps do you need to take? Is that you're having a conversation with your veteran that a storm is coming in. You're having a conversation about what that may be like because you live next to a weather siren. The news might be a lot to take in, especially if it's something that's devastating that destroyed homes and businesses and really important centers in our community. I tell a story a lot about my time being prepared and doing preparedness work, and that I never thought in a million years in a disaster that the epicenter of healthcare in our community would be destroyed. So in 2007, my community went through an EF3 tornado. And what it did essentially was leave our hospital in ruins. And being in a very small rural community, that hospital was the epicenter. It was emergency care, it was maternity care, it was surgical services, it was mental health services. It's where we all went. So to go one day somewhere that you could go and you know you could get help and see the doctors that you need to see, to the next day, everything's completely destroyed and you don't know where to go or how to pick up again. Okay. So we need to know what that's going to impact and what your plan is afterwards and how you can talk to your veteran about that, right? So that can be a lot to take in, especially if it's someplace that your veteran visits regularly, that they go to. If that were to collapse, if that were to be destroyed, you have a backup plan of where you're going to go to reinstate those services, to reconnect to that epicenter, or the best that we can in a recovery centered place. So I would say that when we're making a plan, we're also being very mindful about what our veterans' early warning signs are. Okay. We need to know when things are getting bad. Remember, disasters and emergencies are very chaotic in nature, and your veteran is going to be able to tell you what might trigger them the most. Okay, so we need to remember that it could be very, very noisy. It could be very, very desolate. So everybody's sheltering in place. There's nobody there. No power, no water. Those are all very realistic possibilities when we're looking at a disaster plan. So we also need to be really mindful about what that means for your veteran and how we can recognize that they are starting to experience some really negative health impacts, negative to them, negative to the space around them. Okay. Nobody wants to feel stressed or anxious about the unknown. So when we're preparing, we're also preparing our veteran so that there is no mystery. So with that, we need to know when we're looking at this, what's going to make a difference? What's going to set my veteran off and make their PTSD worse or really trigger their anxiety and stress? We need to know that so that we can better mitigate it. Okay. We want to work around it. We don't want to wait until it's right there in our face and our veteran is pacing and they're having a hard time and struggling and just melting down in front of us for us to act. We want to be mindful of what's happening before them and those steps leading up to it so we can avoid it, or maybe just altogether it not be there. And that takes time. And that takes a communication, that takes a conversation, but it can be done. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, and I'm going to show you some examples of how you can start that conversation. Okay. So as we're looking at this, I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to look at some other pieces in our plan. So here we go. Yep, we're screen sharing. So with that, we are looking at kind of the important steps in preparing your veteran. So thinking through what that means for you, how that works. We're looking at what outside agencies you need to be involved in. So if your veteran has medical equipment of some kind, oxygen tanks, medication, specialized medication. We're talking to providers and understanding how are we going to continue that care if all the power goes out, the roads are impassable. How am I going to get this to me and to my veteran? Remember, our goal is to remain healthy and safe as long as possible and to the extent that we're able to in a very uncertain time. Okay. And then you'll see here in our toolkit, we also, when you look at our plan template, a template of what your emergency plan should look like, we're also including those early warning signs. So when I talk about early warning signs, sometimes I notice, and with the people that I have been a caregiver for, it might be pacing. It could be that they're asking the same questions over and over, that they're what I call doom scrolling. So they're just trying to ingest as much media and content as possible about what's going on. So we want to know what those early warning signs are so we can keep a check on them. Okay. And then we also want to kind of understand how I can manage those behaviors. So when you see this happening, how are you going to manage that for a veteran? If if your veteran is pacing and they have a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, they might not be receptive to you saying, "Oh, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Just sit down, strap in. We're on the ride now." That might not be a good use of a communicational language versus, "Hey, I noticed that you're pacing. You seem really stressed and really anxious. Can we talk about it? Or can we do something that might help decrease that, whether that's deep breathing, you're reading a book that you really like, whether that's really looking at things that you can do to help be prepared as a veteran." So it's a conversation. Remember, like I said in the beginning, we're not going to get it all right the first time. Okay. It's a process. It's a process. So I also want to be mindful that you're a caregiver to a veteran, but you're also probably caregiving to other people in your life. So we want to make sure that we're addressing those concerns in our plan and that we're establishing that, especially when it comes to our health. Okay. So think about it like this. So power goes out, everything's gone astray, and you experience a health emergency of some kind. First responders come and get to you. If you don't have that listed anywhere, if you're not listing those concerns regarding your family's health, EMTs and first responders are kind of shooting in the dark. They're kind of looking to see if there's anything they can do versus you actually stating what the concern is and how you can address that. Also, I find it really good to acknowledge the ways that manage your stress during an emergency and kind of what steps you can take. So one of the things that I can tell you that's really important in our house is that we don't consume all the media. Okay. So we have our local station. We know that's where we're going to get our information from. So we're going to back off news outlets. We have our trusted source. We know where it's going to come from. We're going to back off with that. Okay. We're not going to watch CNN all day, every day until the power goes out. We're not going to be struggling and just really chomping at the bit to try to find some kind of information. We know where that information is and we feel really comfortable in it. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing again and we're going to talk about what it means to have a kit. So the next thing everybody in emergency preparedness is going to tell you, the second thing you should have. So first we got to have a plan. The second is you got to have an emergency kit. Okay. So again, let's address some elephants in the room. A lot of times when I talk to caregivers about emergency kits, they tell me that it's very overwhelming. It's very overwhelming because one, I just made the daggone plan. I did all of that work to make a plan, and now I have to build a kit to go with it. Oh my goodness. The other part of that is that caregivers, we're financially stressed. It's financially, um, it can be very concerning when money's involved, especially when you're making a kit, because we can see kits as being very expensive. Okay. So when we're looking at a kit, sometimes we get these lists of what should be in your kit, and that's things that add up to a lot of money. Okay. And I understand that. I recognize that. But I think when we look at our toolkits, when we look at our plans, when we look at building a kit, there are some things that we can do that can navigate both of these concerns with the understanding that you can take time to build a kit. Okay. Some people, you're just not going to have an influx of income to let you immediately go out and buy all those things in that kit in one go. That's it's okay. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to kind of understand what you need in your kit and how you can make it happen and make sure everything's in there. So, to navigate both of these concerns, I tell people we'll put it into a plan, a 6-month plan. So, one of the things you can do to make sure that your emergency kit is very caregiver friendly, it's unique to you and your caregiving journey with your veteran, is that you take it month by month. So each month you're going to focus on a specific topic to go into your kit, whether that's canned foods, whether that's making sure you have really good copies of the important papers that you're going to need. You're taking the time. So when we're taking the time to make the concept of building and developing our kit, we also want to recognize that there are probably a lot of things that go into a kit that you probably already have at home. Okay. So, and some of these materials you can also find at a dollar store or a cost saving store of some kind. We call them the dollar store here in my area. It might go by a different name where you are as you're watching this, but just be aware that there are places where you can get some of these materials for low cost, or that you already have a surplus of them in your home. So one of the examples I use are batteries. We buy batteries kind of in bulk these days. It's very rare that you just need 2 batteries. You usually buy the big kits of batteries, so you probably already have a couple of extra, right? So we're just making sure that we have them at home and that we can at least have some to get us started, right? So when we're looking at building a kit, sometimes a checklist is really going to be helpful. So I'm going to tell you that in our template, in our toolkit, we provide you with any and all checklists you could possibly think of. And then there's the opportunity to look at them and then create your own. You are unique in being a caregiver and how you care for your veterans. So we want to make sure that as you're developing checklists, as you're developing a kit, that they're really, really focused on what you need. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to look at some checklists, and we're going to look and see. We're going to look and see what kind of checklists we got going on. So in the toolkit that you can download, you can see we have a lot of checklists for a lot of different things. So we have personal items, so things that are very personal to you, to each individual in your home. Maybe some additional items that you may need. Then those special needs, such as the equipment, where you storing that equipment if you're not using it. So sometimes those the medical equipment can be very large, cumbersome, weigh a lot. So when we're looking at it from that perspective, we just want to make sure we know where that piece of equipment, that thing is, and where is its home, right? We also want to be sure that we're being mindful of the pets that are in our home. They're very important, whether they're a service animal or not. We want to make sure that if we were to have to evacuate, we were to have to shelter in place for an extended amount of time, that we're being very mindful of the pets that are going to be in our homes with us. So whether that's making sure you have lots of food and water for the next couple of days, right? You should have water yourself to drink, but your pets are also going to need water. We're making sure that we have, a crate or a carrier if we need to, because animals can get very anxious during severe weather, and we want to make sure they feel comfortable, they feel safe. We also want to make sure that you have the identification for that animal. If that animal were to run off or get lost, it has its identification collar, it has its tag on it. Somebody can get that animal back to you and back to its home. Okay. We also want to be mindful that there's some special things around service animals that you might need as if you're evacuating, or if you have the possibility of that we want to make sure that's in our emergency preparedness kit. Okay, so with that, I'm also going to show you this, and this is our month by month plan. So if we want to look at this, you can use this again as a template to work from, but really looking at how you can break down those things that you need in your kit month by month. You can pick a topic. So if you'll look at this, we have kind of like the main topics that we're going to need. So your food, your water, formula, if you have children in the home. And then month 2, we look at kind of those electronic batteries, chargers that we may need. I call them like the charging bricks that you can take with you to charge if you're not near an outlet. So you can divide your month by month kit building into certain topics that might be really beneficial. I find that helps me stay really, really organized and making sure that everything's in my kit. Okay. So now we've talked about a plan. We've talked about what we need to get started in a plan, some very special things we need as a caregiver of a veteran in our plan. We've talked about a kit, what we should look for in a kit, how we can make that kit really fit into our caregiving journey without being overwhelming, without being financially burdensome to us, and that we can be really feel really good about that journey. So I say when we look at that, we have the basics, right? But we also need to focus on how we can incorporate our caregiving in our veteran in a more targeted way. Because going through a disaster as a caregiver is unique in a couple of different situations. So as a caregiver of a veteran, your needs and how you kind of manage and mitigate the risk in your household are unique compared to your non-caregiving peers or your caregiver friends and family that don't care for a veteran. So when we look at that and we look at really being more targeted in our plan and our toolkit of what we want to do, the ultimate goal for you as a prepared caregiver at the end of a disaster is that you, your veteran, your house are safe, and that you've been able to do that through planning and preparation. You are able to manage, mitigate those risks to you and your veteran. So understanding that there are ways to ensure that everyone is safe, that everyone knows what their roles are about the potentials, situations, disasters, emergencies that come your way. All right. So when I look at this and when I look at this topic, and I've talked to a lot of caregivers and a lot of research in this area, I would say one of the most important things, and sometimes the hardest things for us as caregivers, and I say that with myself included, is that knowing that that person that you can care for also can help in being prepared. Sometimes we get in a caregiver mindset and we're trying to give care. We're trying to do that as best we can to the best of our ability, as much as we can. And sometimes we forget that the people that we care for also have a role in this, and that they also can help us be prepared. And sometimes that's really hard for us to acknowledge. I say that from a personal, very loving space, that when I think about it, the ultimate reason why I try to do all the things is because I don't want the person that I'm caring for to be unsafe or risk hurting themselves. And when we look at roles and journeys and being prepared and what that means and talking about things and having everybody have a seat at the table when it comes to preparedness, we can have a hard time switching roles, right? It's hard. It's hard to do. There's no shame in admitting that it's hard. We just need to acknowledge it and find a path forward. So when I say switch roles, I mean, we're a caregiver, we're also a partner to this person, we're a family member, and now we're in charge of planning disasters. So we're taking on a new role. But we also need to know that as caregivers of veterans, veterans have a lot of wealth of knowledge and experience in disasters and disaster-like experiences, okay? They ultimately have been through some things that we may never or will never experience, but some of those skills can be transferable in times like this. And so when I say that, I also say that with the caveat that to remember our goal as a caregiver for those that we care for is to keep them healthy and safe, okay? But we also need to be realistic about the experiences that our veterans have had and how they can really come to the table with information to help us prepare, okay? And that might be just a really simple conversation, okay? So I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to look at some conversation starters when we're talking about disaster and disaster preparedness. So in the toolkit, we feature some conversation prompts to get this started. So one of the simplest things is, hey, I want to talk about why we're preparing for a disaster. I want you to know what I feel like my role is in disaster preparedness. And do you see yourself as having a role in it? Whether that's making sure that the kits are all together, looking over the plan, making sure everything's in order. Do you feel like you have a role in this? Or is this something that makes you very anxious and very stressed? So I need to be sure that I take on the brunt of this, these endeavors. Another thing that we find really helpful when having conversation is just to really be honest about how you function as a caregiver and how that makes you feel, okay? So as you can see, we have a conversation prompt that says, how does going through a disaster make you feel? This is how it makes me feel. So I want you to remember that as you're having these conversations, that you're using emotion words, that you're calling out the fact that you are stressed, you are anxious about this event that may or may not come. It may be hit you really hard in your community, or it may be, a light shower of rain. We want to make sure that you're using those words so that your veteran can also feel like they can use those words and be really honest about their feelings. So when we're looking at having a conversation and starting conversations, you need to remember that it can be really frustrating for both sides to come to the table. Having hard conversations about abilities, about how stress and anxiety comes through during really stressful situations and chaotic situations can be very frustrating. And there's some really hard topics to discuss, especially with veterans who are used to being that person that's really knows what they're doing and having that path forward. But I'm telling you that when you're having conversations about triggers, about stress management skills, about what's going to help make them feel better about going through something chaotic and uncertain, is that you're coming from a place of curiosity, okay? You're approaching this as, I am curious to how you're feeling on the inside. I can't read your mind. I want to have a conversation and what we can do, and then also what you can do and what is possible and not possible for me as a caregiver, okay? So Also know that a veteran having a role in disaster preparedness um, is also letting them acknowledge what their early warning signs are. So I'm going to stop my screen for a minute. Bam, we're back. And what their early warning signs are. Remember, we had in our plan that you knew what those early warning signs are, that they are listed in your plan. But before we list them, we need to have a conversation about them. We need to know what's going to happen when our veteran starts getting overwhelmed, and what are some easy ways that we can navigate that. And some of the best ways I found, again, just having a conversation, starting the conversation. Hey, we need to prepare for potential bad weather. Remember, we made a plan, we made a kit. I want to make sure we're ready. I want to see, do you want to help me in this? Can we start by talking about what makes you anxious? What makes you stressed? What makes you feel overwhelmed? What you feel like you can do, and what you feel like is just not within the realm of possibility for you. Remember, there are no right or wrong answers. This is a process, okay? So this is a process that we're working with. So I'd say when we're looking at this and we're having some important conversations around disasters and emergencies, we use this as an opportunity to really talk about what you see as a caregiver as potential triggers. So I mentioned this before, weather sirens. Disasters can be very loud, and you might not realize how loud they can be. Weather sirens are a perfect example of that. They are jarring if you've never heard them. They definitely get your attention, but that might trigger your veteran. So it's important that we have these conversations. We understand what those triggers are. You're bringing your potentials to the table, and that way your veteran can feel like they can have a communication about you with what they see as their triggers. So in talking about stress and anxiety and trying to establish communication, I'm going to tell you there's also some fun to be had in what seems like a very unfun time, right? Doesn't seem fun, but we can do this. So one of the ways that we have found that has worked really well with veterans and their caregivers when we're talking about stress and anxiety and really looking at how we can make this engaging for everybody in the house. So remember, we also have hidden helpers there with us. We might have a care team there that's not there every day, that's sheltering in place with us. We can make this communication technique honest and fun so your veteran can be more willing to open up. Remember, we're using emotion words as we're establishing this communication, but some of the best ways we found, because who wants to be outed, right? Who wants to say, I'm experiencing overwhelming stress and anxiety here. What are we going to do about it? No. So we found that some of the best ways is to come up with code words. So each code word is linked to an emotion or a stress rating. Okay. So it can be helpful in several different ways. So if you're evacuating and you're in a congregate shelter, so what that means is you're in a shelter with a lot of other people. Those people might not be well versed in veteran issues, or your veteran, because you're the caregiver. That's your veteran. That's your person you care for. We don't want to out ourselves. That's not fun. That's not fun to say, I have so much anxiety and stress about this event, because everybody's experiencing stress and anxiety, and nobody wants to talk about, it's hard to talk about our mental health challenges in a room full of people we don't know. So one of the best ways we found is to use colors for emotions or for anxiety stress ratings. So I'm going to share my screen again. Bear with me. Here we go. And as you can see on this screen, we use the colors red, yellow, green. And so with this is an example. Again, feel free in your preparedness journey as a caregiver of a veteran to kind of make this your own, and however you see it works best with you. So with this, we did red, yellow, green. Red means really bad. So an example of how you can use it. So let me back up. An example of how you can use it is you're there with your veteran. Maybe they've stopped talking as much. They seem like they're kind of turning inward to themselves. And so you can look at them and just say, hey, what's your color? And so red, yellow, green. Red, I'm having really bad stress, anxiety. It's really high. We need to do something right now. I need to implement a coping skill, some kind of mechanism to help me decrease this. Yellow, I'm telling you this as a warning. I'm feeling it creep up on me. I'm feeling all of those early warning signs. And then green, I'm good. I'm good. I'm just taking it as it is. I'm good. So there are a lot of things that you can do when you're looking at your veteran and when you're looking at emotions, and especially when we're talking about, I would say, kind of more negative emotions. So those anxiety, stress, doom and gloom emotions, I'll say there's a lot of things that you can do as far as coming up with calming words or phrases to help your veteran know, I am here. I am here. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to stay with you. We're going to go through this together. And there's also a lot of things that you can do as a calming phrase. So if you have grounding techniques or stress management skills that are based on words of affirmation, things that are helpful, if you can get that within your communication library for disaster preparedness, you can go through that with them once they say their color. So like I said, veterans very high stress, you say, hey, what's the color? They say red. You can immediately go into, oh, everything's okay. I am here. You are here. Let's take some deep breaths together. Okay. So they're just very simple ways that you can make it fun. You can make it engaging, a way that everybody feels like they can talk about this. Your veteran feels like they can be honest about it. And you can have a really good, healthy experience in a time where that might not be possible. So with that, I'm going to tell you that if you're going to do this, and we're going to acknowledge all of these risks, these triggers, acknowledging the mental health aspect as well as any physical wounds of war, that we're also having some comfort items available for that veteran. So if you're sheltering in place, is there something that smells really good that makes them feel like home? So, an example, your perfume, if you're a female caregiver, if you're a male caregiver, your cologne, some kind of smell that helps them kind of snap back to where they are. Also, you can use family photos, make you a little photo album that you can keep in your kit so that when that happens, you can bring it out and you can go through it. You can ask questions about the pictures, kind of redirect them and kind of help them manage that so they can feel present and in the moment. Okay. So with all of that, we have gone through a lot today. So we have learned how to make a plan. We have learned what needs to be in our kit. And we have learned what we can do to make our disaster preparedness journey really good. Because again, our ultimate goal is to make sure that we're safe and we're healthy. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. I'm going to ask you if you'll take a few minutes, scan the QR code, and let's see how you feel at the end of this. So again, you had took one before. Now let's take another one. Let's see if we feel more confident about our preparedness. We feel like we can engage more. This survey also helps us at the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers better develop programming and content for you by you. So please take a few seconds and fill out our post-webinar survey. Again, if you want to download this toolkit, you can go to rosalindcarter.org. This is the toolkit you're looking for. This is a toolkit that is specifically for caregivers of veterans. This was designed and built and created in partnership with the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. So we've gone through great links with wonderful partners to make sure that you can have a really good preparedness journey so we can be prepared for our worst days. With that being said, I want to tell you thank you again for your time. My name is Leslie Poole. If you have any questions, anything that you want to ask about this particular topic, there is my email down at the bottom. I'm available and would love to help you in your preparedness journey. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.